In the late 70s, one of Hollywood's biggest actresses had the brilliant idea to make a movie called Roar, starring 71 real lions. And that was just the lions. Between panthers, tigers, and other wild animals, the total climbed to 150, making it easily the most dangerous animal shoot in film history. Not even Werner Herzog dared to go that far. Don't forget to leave a like and share this video, because today we're diving into everything, from animal attacks on set to fires, floods, and vicious accidents that nearly wiped out the entire crew. Without a doubt, Roar is one of the most dangerous and unhinged productions in film history. And it shows just how far celebrities will go to chase their craziest whims. Now, who could possibly come up with a project as extravagant and dangerous as Roar? None other than Tippi Hedren and Noel Marshall. In the early 60s, Hedren made the leap from modeling to acting when Alfred Hitchcock cast her as the lead in The Birds. She quickly rose to fame and success, though her personal life told a different story. She divorced actor Peter Griffith and soon began a relationship with Noel Marshall, her agent. Originally from Chicago, Marshall was passionate about both movies and animals. As a young man, he worked at the St. Louis Zoo, where he had direct contact with all kinds of species, especially lions. Hedren and Marshall were seen as one of Hollywood's most glamorous couples. They lived a quiet life in Sherman Oaks and owned 4 properties along with nearly 600 acres of land across California. They also wanted to work together on a film, but they couldn't quite find the right idea. That is, until they took a trip to Africa. In 1969, Hedren traveled to Mozambique to film Satan's Harvest. During her days off, she and Marshall would head out on excursions. They hoped to spot animals in their natural habitat, but none ever appeared. Their guide explained it was because so many animals had been hunted. The next day, as Hedren and Marshall were on their way to the set, they couldn't get it out of their minds. That's when they spotted an old plantation house inside Gorongosa National Park. Lying by the entrance was a lion. Then another lion poked its head through a window, and a third climbed up onto the roof and sprawled out, gazing at the horizon. More lions kept coming and going, moving through the place like they owned it. Locals later told them that the house actually belonged to the lions. Hedren and Marshall were fascinated. Right then and there, they came up with the idea for a movie about a house overrun by lions. It wouldn't be a documentary, it would be pure fiction. At the time, they had no real grasp of just how dangerous such a project could turn out to be. Back in the United States, Hedren and Marshall were determined to bring their movie to life. They wanted to make it independently, but still use the advantages that came with being famous. Only then could they achieve a level of realism no one had ever seen before, and shoot with total creative freedom. But first, they called a meeting with both of their families. Hedren brought in her daughter, Melanie Griffith, who was just a young teenager at the time. Marshall gathered his sons, John, Joel, and Jerry. They told them about the project and their plan to shoot with real lions. No special effects, no Hollywood tricks. The kids loved the idea, but when their parents asked if they wanted to act in it, they fell silent. Melanie finally spoke up, saying she was worried about getting her face messed up. Her mother assured her everything would be fine, and she agreed to join. John and Jerry also said yes. Joel, on the other hand, preferred to help behind the scenes as the film's art director. Hedren and Marshall now had the support of their families, but they still needed to find their furry stars. They visited animal reserves and spoke with big cat experts. Everyone advised them to work with trained animals. But there were 2 major issues. In Africa, lions only lived in the wild, and more importantly, it would be pure madness to bring that many predators together on a film set. Those warnings could have scared off Hedren and Marshall. But the exact opposite happened. They met Ron Oxley, an animal trainer with a very different outlook. He told them the secret was to build a bond with the lions early on. So he offered them a young cub, who they named Neil. The couple agreed to take him in for a while, taking all the necessary precautions. Before they knew it, Neil was part of the family. Seeing how well things were going, Oxley suggested they raise more big cats, give them some basic training, and let them live together. Hedren and Marshall had plenty of money and a spacious house. So, in 1971, they began adopting lions and other felines they found in zoos and circuses. They didn't keep them in cages. Instead, they let them roam freely through the house, even if it meant expensive furniture getting torn to pieces. Before long, Hedren and Marshall had built what was basically a sanctuary. But trouble wasn't far behind. One morning, a roar rolled across the hills. A worried neighbor knocked on their door, asking what was going on. Hedren, staying polite, told her it was probably just a motorcycle. But a few days later, one of the lions escaped. The actress managed to stop it right in the middle of the street. Those incidents quickly caught the attention of California authorities. Before long, an animal control officer showed up at their door with an eviction order for the big cats. A scandal like that could have easily derailed Hedren and Marshall's plans. But by then, with several full-grown lions wandering through their house, nothing was going to stop them. Marshall wrote a script he first titled Lions. Then he changed it to Lions, Lions, and More Lions, before finally settling on Roar. The story centers on Hank, an American naturalist living on a wildlife reserve in Africa, surrounded by a variety of big cats. Things take a turn when he has to leave to deal with poachers, just as his wife Madeleine arrives with their 3 kids, Melanie, John, and Jerry. Their visit throws the animals into chaos, and the family is left to fend for themselves, leading to plenty of tense moments. Still, Marshall conceived it as a lighthearted family comedy about the importance of preserving animals in their natural habitat, which, when you think about it, feels a little contradictory, considering they had bought dozens of lions and were keeping them in captivity. But if Roar proves anything, it's that ideological contradictions and celebrities have always gone hand in hand, even since the dawn of time. With the first draft ready, Marshall and Hedren kicked off a production they swore wouldn't cost more than $3 million. And if you've seen enough videos on this channel, you already know how that budget story ends. With their budget, at least according to them, locked in, Hedren and Marshall now had to figure out how to keep the animals they had already bought. With neighbors growing more and more afraid and the California government threatening to seize their collection, they purchased a piece of land in Soledad Canyon, just north of Los Angeles. It would serve not only as a new sanctuary, but also as their film set. Marshall commissioned the construction of a colonial-style house with a flat roof, modeled after the homes he had seen in Mozambique. They planted poplars and shrubs native to that region, and even created an artificial lake. Bit by bit, they recreated a slice of Africa right in the middle of California. Taking full advantage of the new space, Hedren and Marshall kept adding more and more animals. At one point, they had 71 lions, 26 tigers, 2 jaguars, 4 leopards, 9 black panthers, 10 cougars, a liger, a lion-tiger hybrid, 2 elephants, 4 cranes, and 7 flamingos. In total, the number of animals soared to 150. By law, they needed 1 trainer for every 2 animals, so they had to bring in a whole team of specialists. Hedren and Marshall knew their expenses were getting out of control. To put things in perspective, each big cat needed between 10 and 25 pounds of meat every single day. Marshall had gotten into film production and even scored a major hit with The Exorcist, pouring most of his earnings into Roar. But it still wasn't enough. They had to sell 4 properties and over 600 acres of land, and even that didn't cover it, so the whole family had to pick up other jobs just to stay afloat. Between one thing and another, 1976 rolled around, and they still hadn't shot a single scene. By then, Marshall and Hedren were too deep to back out, so they rushed to kick off production. While the real stars were always going to be the animals, they still needed a few human celebrities. Hedren was set to play Madeleine, but they were still missing someone for Hank. They offered the role to Jack Nicholson, but he turned it down. So did every other big actor they approached. Nobody wanted to risk working with wild animals. After a flood of rejections, Marshall decided to step in and play the role himself. He ended up as the writer, director, co-producer, and co-star of Roar. Hedren and Marshall also pulled together a crew willing to take on a completely unconventional experience. Among them were assistant director Doran Cowper and Dutch cinematographer Jan de Bont, who would be working in the US for the very first time. Marshall even made sure they set up post-production studios right there in Soledad Canyon. With everything ready to go, filming on Roar kicked off on October 1st, 1976. And if everything you've heard so far sounds insane, just wait. On the very first day of filming, Marshall decided to kick things off with a fight between adult male lions. Even with a trainer nearby, the sheer brutality of the clash and the deafening roars terrified everyone on set. But Marshall was determined to prove he was the real alpha male, worthy of the animals' respect. He jumped between the lions and tried to break up the fight, just like he used to do when playing with them, until one of them bit his hand. Marshall had to be rushed to a hospital where a surgeon operated on him urgently. But while he was there, he caught an infection that nearly killed him. His condition got so bad that he was just 12 hours away from slipping into a coma and dying. In the end, doctors managed to save him, and he eventually recovered enough to return to the set. And yes, this all happened on day 1. But the animal incidents kept getting worse. Of the 140 people who worked on the production, 70 ended up injured. And some of those injuries were downright brutal. In one scene, cinematographer Jan de Bont had to film cherries, one of the first lions Hedren and Marshall had adopted. De Bont took all the necessary precautions, hiding under a tarp, but Cherry still managed to rip his scalp off. He needed 220 stitches and seriously considered quitting the project and leaving North America altogether. In the end, he came back to the set, but from that moment on, he didn't trust the animals or their owners. Things got even worse for Doron Cowper, the assistant director. He was overseeing a scene with Togar, one of the most dangerous lions they had. When he accidentally moved his arm, Togar attacked, biting and clawing, ripping off his scalp and leaving his chest and thigh badly torn. He was rushed to Palmdale General Hospital, where surgeons worked on him for more than 4 hours. Because of the attacks, most of the crew ended up quitting. Marshall and Hedren kept hiring replacements, but none of them stuck around for long. Between the risk of becoming a tiger's lunch and the lousy pay, nobody wanted to stay. Hedren and Marshall's kids didn't escape the attacks either. Jerry walked into a lion's cage and got bitten on the thigh. John was bitten on the back of the head by another lion. It took 6 trainers to pull the animal off him, but he still needed 56 stitches. What happened to Melanie was even more traumatic. A lioness swiped her across the face. By the time she got to the hospital, there was a serious risk she could end up disfigured or even lose an eye. Fortunately, a team of doctors managed to reconstruct her face and save her eye. If you thought Hedren managed to avoid the animal's fury, you'd be wrong. A leopard scratched her arm, and a cougar bit her in the chest. But the worst injuries came from Tembo, one of the elephants. Because yes, there were elephants on this set too. She approached Tembo to pet him, but he grabbed her by the ankle with his trunk and threw her. She was rushed to Antelope Valley Hospital, where doctors treated her for a fractured hand and leg injuries that later turned into gangrene. The problems on Roar didn't end with the animals. On February 9, 1978, after heavy rains, a nearby dam burst and triggered a massive flood. The set and the post-production studios were completely submerged. Much of the footage was destroyed, causing millions of dollars in losses. But the worst part was that lives were lost. Marshall and the trainers managed to rescue many animals, but 15 lions and tigers escaped through the damaged cages. Most of them were eventually recaptured in an operation led by Marshall himself. Still, he couldn't stop the police from shooting 3 of the big cats as they roamed through a nearby neighborhood. Because of the flood and everything that followed, Marshall and Hedren had to shut down filming for a full year. They needed time to buy new equipment, recover what they could from the damage, and take care of the animals' health. And on top of it all, they were completely out of money. They had to sell personal belongings and pick up other jobs just to raise funds. When everything was finally back on track, Soledad Canyon was hit by 12 wildfires. Luckily, they managed to contain them before any serious damage was done. After years of animal attacks and natural disasters, Roar finally wrapped filming on October 16, 1979. It looked like the chaos and madness had finally come to an end, but new complications were about to surface. Once the final cut was ready, Marshall started looking for a studio to distribute the film. Despite his reputation, he was turned down by every Hollywood executive. According to Hedren, they refused because Marshall wanted a big chunk of the profits to go toward fighting poaching and protecting wildlife. But there was another issue. Almost the entire crew had worked off the books, outside of the union. Not being able to release the film in the United States frustrated Hedren and Marshall. But once again, they found a way. They managed to premiere it in Sydney, Australia on October 30th, 1981. And secured distribution in countries like Japan, Germany, Italy, and the UK. The reviews, however, were even fiercer than the lions. Critics especially ripped into the script, the production, and the performances. Hedren and Marshall had hoped audiences would be as captivated by the animals as they had been by the lions in Mozambique, but hardly anyone showed up. Roar ended up costing $17 million and bringing in only $2 million. All that work and suffering seemed to have been for nothing, or at least that's how it looked at the time. The failure of Roar took a heavy toll on Tippi Hedren and Noel Marshall. They divorced in 1982, and neither ever managed to get their careers back on track. Hedren had to settle for smaller roles in film and television, while Marshall never directed another movie and passed away from cancer in 2010. But not everyone ended up losing. Jan de Bont, the cinematographer who nearly lost his head during filming, went on to work on several classics and even directed movies like Twister, which, by the way, also had a chaotic shoot and got its own video on this channel. Melanie Griffith became a star and later became the mother of actress Dakota Johnson. As for the film itself, it developed a cult following and finally got a US theatrical release in 2015, thanks to Drafthouse Films. That revival eventually led to the documentary Roar, the most dangerous movie ever made. As for the lions and the other animals, Hedren never stopped taking care of them. She founded the Shambhala Preserve, which still shelters big cats abandoned by private owners to this day. Hedren later published her autobiography, The Cats of Shambhala, where she admits to the mistakes made during the production of Roar, while continuing to stand by her defense of animal rights. Roar was meant to be a bold project with a message about nature, but it turned into a story of recklessness, irresponsibility, and tragedy. Its creators set out to honor nature, but ended up learning a brutal truth. You can't tame what was born to be wild. If there's one movie in Hollywood history with a truly controversial ending, it's Seven. Its cast is legendary, and director David Fincher practically owes his career to this film.